The metallic clack of the bolt assembly sliding home sounded too loud over the hum of the diesel generators. She didn't look up. The new guys were laughing, a sharp, ugly sound in the 110-degree heat. They saw a woman covered in dust. They didn't see the rifle. The forward operating base sat in a nameless valley somewhere near the border, a miserable stretch of sun-baked rock that smelled permanently of burning trash, diesel exhaust, and stale sweat. Rose sat on a scuffed pelican case in the shade of a camouflage net, a greasy rag wrapped around her right hand. Her back ached. It was a dull, thudding pain at the base of her spine, a souvenir from a hard parachute landing in Helmand 3 years ago that the military doctors had repeatedly told her was just inflammation. She shifted her weight, feeling the grit of sand grind between her molars as she clamped her jaw. She didn't want to be awake. She wanted an unbroken 6 hours of sleep in a room that didn't smell like MRE chemical heaters. Instead, she was cleaning her Mk13 sniper rifle, smelling the sharp, chemical bite of Hopper's No. 9 solvent. Footsteps crunched on the gravel, heavy, deliberate, carrying the unearned confidence of fresh deployments. "I'm telling you, it's a logistics nightmare. Command sends us out here with half the intel, and we're supposed to what? Guess?" Rose kept her eyes on the receiver of her weapon. She recognized the voices. Task Force Viper, Army Rangers mostly. Good kids, heavy hitters, but loud. They'd rotated in 12 hours ago, stepping off the Chinooks with clean gear and a surplus of adrenaline. 3 of them stopped near the edge of the shade. Rose could see their boots, clean suede. Not for long. "Hey!" Rose didn't stop wiping the bolt. The carbon buildup was stubborn, caked around the firing pin. She dug her thumbnail into the rag, scraping at the black residue. "Hey, sweetheart," the voice came again, closer this time. It was the squad leader, a broad-shouldered guy with a fresh buzz cut and a patch reading Bennett. "You deaf?" Rose finally paused. She didn't look up at his face, just at his chest rig. Standard issue, pouches too full. Radio wire routed awkwardly. "No," she said. Her voice was gravelly, dry from the heat and lack of water. Bennett let out a short, breathy laugh. He looked back at the other 2, Davis and Walsh. They smirked. "Didn't know they were letting analysts clean the heavy hardware," Bennett said, stepping into the shade. He pointed a thick finger at the dismantled Mk13 on her lap. "Careful with that. The bolt's a little complex for someone used to a keyboard. Where's the armorer? I need my optics zeroed before the brief." Rose stared at him. She felt a flicker of irritation, hot and sharp, but it was quickly swallowed by the crushing exhaustion. She didn't have the energy to feed his ego, and she certainly didn't care enough to correct him. She was wearing a sterile, sweat-stained combat shirt, no rank insignias, no unit patches. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, dust-stiffened knot. To them, she was a misplaced female intel officer who had wandered out of the Tactical Operations Center. "Armorer's tent is 2 rows down, past the latrines," Rose said. She went back to scrubbing the bolt. Walsh snorted. "Tell you what, when you're done playing with the big guns, make sure the coffee and the talk is actually hot. Command's got us running a breach tonight, and we're going to need it." They walked off, chuckling. Rose heard the word tourist drift back on the dry wind. She didn't feel a surge of righteous anger. She didn't plot a witty comeback. She just felt tired. Her fingers were calloused, the knuckles scarred white from years of mechanical work and close quarters impact. She picked up a small bottle of lubricating oil, squeezed a single drop onto the bolt carrier, and spread it with her thumb. The metal was warm from the ambient air. Idiots, she thought mildly. But it was a detached thought. In her world, arrogance was a self-correcting problem. The valley usually fixed it, one way or another. She reassembled the rifle with fluid, unconscious efficiency. The parts locked together with a satisfying, heavy snick. She racked the bolt once, checked the chamber, and clicked the safety on. It was a heavy, ugly piece of machinery, scarred by rocks and painted over 3 times. But it was the only thing in this valley she actually trusted. The low thrum of the camp's PA system crackled to life. A distorted voice barked a brief code. All team leads and primary assets to the TOC. Rose sighed, her breath stirring the dust on her lap. She pushed herself off the Pelican case. Her right knee popped audibly. She slung the heavy rifle over her shoulder, feeling the familiar, bruising weight of it settle against her collarbone, and started the slow walk toward the operations center. The Tactical Operations Center was a large, reinforced tent, heavily sandbagged on the outside. Inside, it was 10 degrees cooler, smelling intensely of ozone from the servers, stale sweat, and burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, sickly glow over the plywood tables, and the men gathered around them. When Rose pushed through the heavy canvas flaps, the room was already full. Bennett and his rangers were clustered near the front, taking up space, talking in low, aggressive tones. Several Marine raiders stood near the back, arms crossed, looking thoroughly unimpressed by the Army boys' chatter. Rose didn't push her way into the crowd. She stayed near the back, leaning her shoulder against a wooden support beam. She unslung the Mk-13, resting the stock gently on the toes of her boots to keep it out of the dirt, and let her eyes drift half shut. The dull roar of the air conditioning unit was competing with the ringing in her left ear. At the front of the room stood Commander Vance. Vance was a man who looked like he had been left out in the sun to cure. His face was a map of deep creases, his eyes a pale, washed-out blue. He had been a SEAL for 22 years, and he wore his authority not with loudness, but with a terrifying, absolute stillness. When Vance walked into a room, people shut up. He didn't say a word as he stepped up to the digital map table. He just tapped the screen. The chatter died instantly. 3 hours ago, Vance began, his voice barely above a gravelly whisper, forcing everyone to lean in to hear him. A Marine recon element got pinned down in the Korengal sector, grid 44 Alpha. He tapped the screen again. A satellite image blew up, showing a narrow, jagged canyon that looked like a jagged scar in the earth. They're taking heavy fire from a fortified ridgeline. The enemy has elevated positions, heavy machine guns, and at least 2 designated marksmen keeping our boys flat on their stomachs. Air support is negated. The canyon walls are too steep, and the enemy is tucked into caves. Fast movers can't get an angle, and helicopters will get shredded if they try to hover. Bennett leaned forward, his hands planted on the table. So we go in on foot, flank the ridge, root them out. Vance didn't look at him. He just kept looking at the map. The only approach on foot is a 2 miles hike up a 40-degree incline with 0 cover. You'd be target practice before you made it halfway. So what's the play, Commander? A raider asked from the back. The play, Vance said, dragging his finger across the screen to highlight a rocky outcropping on the opposite side of the canyon, is Overwatch. We drop a team here. Elevation is equal to the enemy ridge. From there, a shooter neutralizes the enemy heavy guns and the spotters, buying the Marines a window to exfil down the dry riverbed. Bennett nodded slowly, a tight, confident smile forming. Overwatch. Got it. I've got 2 of the best marksmen in the battalion. Davis hit a man-sized target at 800 meters during workups. We can set up a base of fire and... The distance, Vance interrupted, his voice dropping another fraction of an octave. From the Overwatch point to the enemy cave mouths is 1,450 meters. A heavy silence fell over the tent. The air conditioner rattled. Someone coughed. 1,450 meters. It wasn't an impossible shot on a flat, calm range in Virginia, but in a canyon where the wind ripped through the rock formations in unpredictable, swirling thermals, it was a nightmare. The bullet would have to travel through 3 different wind zones. The drop alone would be massive. Bennett swallowed, his confidence suddenly looking a little brittle. "That's a hell of a poke, sir. With the updrafts in that canyon, reading the wind is going to be a guess. But we'll do our best. Davis can walk his shots in." "If you miss the first shot," Vance said, finally looking up from the board to lock eyes with Bennett, "the enemy realizes they have a sniper on their 6. They fall back into the caves, out of sight, and wait for nightfall. Then they butcher the Marines. There is no walking it in. You get 1 shot to take out their primary gunner." "1." Bennett hesitated. He looked back at his sniper, Davis, who suddenly looked very pale and very young. Davis gave a tight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He didn't want the liability of those Marines' lives on a shot he knew he couldn't make. Bennett turned back to Vance, his jaw tight. "Sir, with all due respect, I don't know anyone in this task force who can guarantee a cold-bore shot at 450 meters through a canyon crosswind. It's a prayer." Vance stared at him for a long, agonizing second. Then, slowly, he looked away. He looked past the table, past the Rangers, past the Raiders. His eyes found the back of the tent. Rose was still leaning against the wooden beam. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were open now, locked on the map projected on the monitors. She was already doing the math in her head. A 1,450-meter shot. The 300-grain bullet leaving the muzzle at 2,800 feet per second. Time of flight, nearly 2.5 seconds. The Magnus effect, the spin drift, the barometric pressure of the valley at nightfall. She felt a dull, familiar weight settle in her chest. Not fear, just the heavy, exhausting reality of duty. Vance stepped away from the table. He walked down the center aisle, the Rangers parting to let him through. He stopped 3 feet in front of Rose. Bennett turned, a confused frown wrinkling his forehead. Why was the commander walking up to the logistics girl? Vance didn't speak immediately. He looked at the dust caked into her hair, the grease stains on her combat shirt, the heavy Mk-13 resting near her boots. He saw the bone-deep fatigue in her posture, the slight tremor in her left hand that she was trying to suppress by pressing it against her thigh. He knew exactly what it cost her to be here. He didn't offer a pep talk. He didn't ask if she could do it. Commander Vance snapped his boots together. The sound echoed sharply in the quiet tent. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand in a crisp, formal salute. It wasn't a casual greeting. It was the kind of salute given to someone whose legend eclipsed their rank. "Master Chief," Vance said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "We have a math problem. I need you to solve it." Rose didn't flinch. She slowly brought her own hand up, her grease-stained fingers touching the edge of her invisible brow, returning the salute with a tired, weary grace. "Commander," she said, her voice raspy. She let her hand drop, and picked up her rifle. In the front of the room, Bennett stood frozen. The color drained completely from his face as he stared at the woman he had just told to make coffee. Beside him, Walsh let out a low, breathy curse. Rose walked past them without a sideways glance. She approached the digital map, her eyes scanning the topographical lines. She didn't look at the Rangers. They had ceased to exist. "Wind at the mouth of the canyon?" Rose asked, her voice shifting into an emotionless, clipped cadence. "Gales up to 15 knots, shifting east to west," Vance replied, stepping up beside her. Rose nodded slowly, chewing on the inside of her cheek. She traced a path on the screen with a dirt-stained finger. "I'll need a spotter who can read mirage in low light. and I need a Black Hawk on the pad in 10 minutes to drop me on the ridge before the thermals shift at dusk." "Done," Vance said. She hoisted the heavy rifle higher onto her aching shoulder. She looked at the red dot on the map representing the pinned-down Marines. "Let's go to work." The Black Hawk rode the thermals like a drunken bird, violently shuddering as it banked over the jagged spine of the Hindu Kush. With the side doors pinned open, the cabin was a wind tunnel of freezing air and the nauseating stench of unburned JP-8 aviation fuel. Rose sat on the floor plates, her boots braced against the doorframe. The heat of the valley floor was gone, replaced by a biting, thin cold that cut right through her sweat-dampened combat shirt. She didn't shiver. She couldn't afford the muscle tension. Beside her sat Miller, a Marine Scout sniper with a face like a worn-out boot and eyes that missed nothing. He was carrying the spotting scope, the weather meter, and a tripod. He hadn't spoken a word since they boarded. Good. Small talk was a waste of oxygen at this altitude. The crew chief held up a single gloved finger. 1 minute, Rose leaned forward, peering down at the black scar of the canyon tearing through the earth below. The sun was dipping below the western peaks, casting the eastern walls into deep, bruised purple shadows. That was exactly what she needed. The shadows would hide her muzzle flash. The chopper flared, hovering unsteadily 10 feet above a narrow, shale-covered outcropping. The crew chief signaled. Rose pushed off the deck, dropping into the rotor wash. Her boots hit the loose rock, sliding a few inches before finding purchase. The shock traveled straight up her legs and slammed into her bad lower back. A sharp, white-hot spike of pain flared at the base of her spine. She gritted her teeth, swallowing a groan, and immediately dropped to her knees to keep a low profile as the Black Hawk banked away, its engine noise fading into the vast emptiness of the mountain range. Silence rushed in to fill the void. It wasn't actually quiet. The wind was howling through the rocks like a dying animal. But compared to the base, it was a tomb. "Movement, grid 4-4, Miller grunted over the radio, already moving in a low crawl toward the edge of the cliff. Rose followed, dragging the heavy Pelican case and her rifle. The jagged shale tore at the elbows of her shirt, scraping her skin raw. She didn't feel it. Her world was rapidly shrinking. The exhaustion, the rangers, the dull throbbing in her back. All of it began to dissolve, replaced by the cold, mechanical process of the setup. They reached the lip of the canyon. Below them, a terrifying drop into darkness. Across the void, a mile away, the enemy ridge. Rose laid out her shooting mat, ignoring the sharp rocks pressing into her ribs. She deployed the bipod legs of the Mk-13. They locked into the dirt with 2 sharp clicks. She settled behind the rifle, pressing her bruised shoulder into the heavy stock. The metal of the receiver was freezing now, sucking the heat from her cheek as she rested her face against it. She popped the covers off her scope. Through the glass, the world was tinted in the harsh green of her night vision optic. "Talk to me, Miller," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Beside her, Miller was glued to his spotting scope. "Got the Marines, bottom of the drawer. Heat signatures are clustered behind a sheer rock face. They're stuck." Rose shifted the rifle. "Where's the gun?" "Elevated position, 3 o'clock from the Marines. Cave mouth, deep recess." Miller paused. "I see flashes. DSHK heavy machine gun. They're suppressing the riverbed. Every time a Marine moves, they lay down a burst." Rose found the cave mouth. It was a black hole in the green display, vomiting jagged yellow streaks of muzzle fire every few seconds. She couldn't see the shooter. She couldn't even see the gun, just the fire. "Distance," Rose said. "Lars is bouncing off the rock face," Miller said, his voice flat, professional. "Best estimate, 1470, 1470 meters." Rose closed her eyes for a second. The math bloomed in her head, cold and unforgiving. 1,070 meters, almost a full mile. A 300-grain bullet drops roughly 1 to 200 inches at that distance. 100 feet of vertical drop. Wind, she said. Miller held up the Kestrel meter, letting the tiny anemometer spin in the gale. He squinted at the digital readout, then looked out over the dark void of the canyon. It's a nightmare, Chief. We've got 12 knots right to left at our position. But look at the dust down in the bowl. It's swirling, full-value crosswind, shifting to an updraft about 800 meters out. Then it dies at the cave mouth. 3 different wind zones. If she misread the updraft, the bullet would sail over the cave. If she underestimated the crosswind, the bullet would smash into the rock wall 20 feet wide of the target. Give me a hold, she said. Dial 28 mils elevation. Hold left 3.5 mils for wind, Miller said, though she could hear the hesitation in his voice. It was an educated guess. At this range, there were no guarantees. Rose reached up with her scarred fingers and twisted the elevation turret. Click, click, click. The tactile feedback was the only thing grounding her. She looked through the scope again. The crosshairs settled on the dark void of the cave. I can't see the target, Rose said. Her tone was completely devoid of panic. It was a simple statement of fact. You're going to have to shoot the flash, Miller replied softly. When he pulls the trigger, he illuminates his own position. Aim for the center of the muzzle burst. Rose let out a slow, trembling breath. Her right eye was starting to water from staring unblinking through the glass. She forced it open. She felt the heavy, suffocating pressure of the moment. Those Marines down in the dirt was bleeding out. They were waiting for a miracle. And Command had sent them a tired, broken woman with a rifle. She wasn't a superhero. She was just a mechanic of violence, and right now the engine needed to run. Send it when ready, Miller whispered. Rose slowed her breathing. She inhaled the freezing air, feeling it expand her lungs, pressing her ribs against the cold rock. Exhale. The wind howled, ripping dust across her scope. Pause. The cave mouth flared yellow. Squeeze. The Mk-13 violently detonated. Even with the suppressor, the roar of the .300 Winchester Magnum was a physical blow in the thin mountain air. The recoil punched Rose's shoulder with the force of a sledgehammer, driving her back into the dirt. A massive cloud of dust kicked up around her muzzle, temporarily blinding her optic. Rose didn't flinch. She instantly forced her shoulder forward, fighting the recoil, driving her eye back into the scope to follow through. Splash! Miller called out, his voice tense. Silence. 1 second, 2 seconds. The bullet was still flying, tearing through the frigid air, fighting the crosswind, clawing its way across the massive expanse of the canyon. To Rose, those 2.5 seconds felt like an eternity. A suspended animation where life and death were just waiting on physics. Impact. Through the scope, a spark flashed against the rock wall, high and right of the cave mouth. Miss, Miller snapped, his voice tight. High and right. The updraft caught it. You were 2 mils right, 1 mil high. Rose's heart hammered against her ribs, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of her neck, despite the freezing temperature. She had missed. The enemy gunner stopped firing. He's spooked, Miller said. He knows he's being hunted. He stepped back into the cave. Rose didn't speak. She didn't curse. She violently yanked the bolt back, ejecting the spent brass casing. It spun through the air, glinting in the moonlight, and clinked against the rocks. She pushed the bolt forward, stripping a fresh, heavy round from the magazine and driving it into the chamber. Adjust. She didn't touch the turrets. She just shifted her reticle. Down 1 mil. left 2 mils. He's going to peek, Miller whispered. He's not going to believe someone can touch him from that far away. He'll look. Rose stared into the blackness of the cave. Her eye was burning. Her muscles were screaming from holding the rigid, unnatural position. She ignored it. She became the rock. She became the rifle. 10 seconds passed. 20. Down in the drawer, the Marines realized the heavy gun had stopped. Someone yelled an order. A heat signature broke from cover, sprinting toward the dry riverbed. The cave mouth flashed. The gunner had stepped back up to the weapon, opening fire on the fleeing Marine. Rose didn't think. She didn't breathe. Her finger broke the sear. Crack! The recoil slammed into her again. The dust plumed. 1 second, 2 seconds. Through the green haze of the optic, Rose watched the muzzle flash of the enemy machine gun. At exactly 2.4 seconds, the yellow flashing abruptly vanished. There was no spark on the rock wall this time. No ricochet. Inside the cave, a dark shape crumpled, falling forward over the barrel of the DSHK. Target neutralized, Miller breathed. He lowered his spotting scope, staring across the canyon with his naked eyes. Direct hit, Chief. You dropped him. Rose stared through the scope for another 5 seconds, making sure the shape didn't move. It didn't. Down in the canyon, the Marines realized the gun was dead. Over the radio, a frantic, static-laced voice broke through. Overwatch, this is Voodoo 2. Good effect on target. We are moving. God bless you, whoever you are. Rose slowly, stiffly, pulled her finger away from the trigger. She engaged the safety. She didn't pump her fist. She didn't smile. She just felt an overwhelming, crushing wave of exhaustion wash over her, so heavy it made her want to vomit. She let her forehead rest against the cold scope. Good call on the wind, Miller, she rasped. Good shooting, Master Chief, he replied quietly, already packing up the Kestrel. The flight back to the Phobie was a blur of rotor noise and freezing wind. When the Black Hawk's skids finally slammed down onto the dirt pad of the base, the sun was just beginning to bleach the eastern sky, turning the horizon a pale, dirty grey. Rose stepped off the chopper, her legs feeling like lead. She dragged the Pelican case behind her, the plastic wheels chewing through the gravel. Her back was a solid block of agonizing pain. Her face was streaked with dirt, grease, and the distinct black carbon rings around her eyes from the optic. She walked slowly toward the armory to log the rifle. As she rounded the corner of the TOC, she saw a group of men smoking in the cool morning air. It was Bennett and his rangers. They saw her coming. The chatter died instantly. Bennett stood there, a half-smoked cigarette pinched between his fingers. He looked at the dust covering her. He looked at the heavy, scarred rifle slung over her bruised shoulder. He had heard the radio chatter. The whole base had heard it. One shot, cold bore, 1,470 meters in the dark. For a second, Rose thought he might say something. An apology, a justification, a cliché about underestimating her. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't have the energy to care about his redemption arc. Bennett met her eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He stepped back, making a wide path for her on the gravel. He didn't salute, they weren't officers, but he stood at rigid attention as she passed. The rest of his men did the same. Complete, unbroken silence. Rose didn't look at them. She didn't nod. She just kept walking, the rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch of her boots the only sound. She was going to drop the rifle off. And then finally, she was going to get those 6 hours of sleep. If Rose's relentless grit and that impossible 1,470-meter shot kept you holding your breath, don't scroll past. This is the kind of raw, untold tactical history that deserves to be remembered. Hit that like button to honor the quiet professionals in the shadows. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder about underestimating others. And subscribe to the channel for more gripping, ground-level military stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken that shot?